Good morning and welcome to our webinar today. My name is Dale Gasparovic. I'm the Student Assistance Center Administrator, and I wanted to welcome everybody to the webinar and remind you all of our upcoming webinars. On April 1st, we're conducting a webinar on using check-in, check-out as a student assistance intervention. That will be done by our staff person up in Chicago, Christy Shirtliff, and a VISTA volunteer who is working in a Chicago public school up there using that intervention. April 15th, we'll be doing mental health in the K through 8 setting. Don Mitkus will be presenting for us on that topic. April 29th, our own consultant Patricia Berry will be conducting a webinar on designing interventions, which is one of our most popular mini trainings that we offer in schools. And on May 13th, we'll be doing a webinar on post-traumatic stress disorder and grief in the K through 8 setting. Don Mitkus, once again, will be joining us to present that information. And we'll wrap up our webinar year on May 27th with a webinar on resource mapping for intervention. So we ask that you join us for any of those that interest you. Of course, all of our webinars are being archived to our website after they are conducted live, so you can always view those webinars on our website after the date of the actual live webinar. In introduction, I want to welcome our presenter today, Judy Cunningham. She is a counselor at a middle school in Rockford, Illinois. And I'll let Judy introduce herself a little bit more as we get ready to conduct her presentation today. I look forward to the information that Judy will present to us today on working with students who have an incarcerated parent. And I am going to turn it over to Judy here now to start her presentation. Judy.
Hello.
Can you hear us, Judy?
Yes, I can. Now I can.
Okay.
Hello. My name is Dale said it is Judy Cunningham. I've been a school counselor pretty close to 35 years. And this concept wasn't what I started out to do. It leaped out at me. We have an in-school suspension room. And part of our counselor's job here at Lincoln is to go in there and talk to kids. Well, as I was talking to kids who were in that room, it would just leap out what was going on. I would say things like, we can go to the next slide.
Okay, there we go.
Okay, they would just start telling me, because I'd say, boy, you're angry. What's going on? Why? And it would just come out because it seems to be on the top of the student's mind, and they feel like when they're walking in the hallways that they're carrying this black cloud and everybody knows. Occasionally another student does know and will say something, but most of the time it's just they're carrying this angry persona. So that behavior gets them in trouble. The secret is they need to trust you because they are feeling abandoned, they're feeling their fear, their rejection. It just comes out. They're embarrassed about where their parent is. If you're really lucky, sometimes the remaining parent will tell you, but that doesn't happen very often. Usually you find out by the student telling you because they're just so frustrated. Okay, let's go to the next. The thing that I found out, and this is trial and error, is that I let the student know it's okay to feel like they're feeling, because they're feeling all kinds of negative emotions, and they're trying to squelch them down, and the old pressure cooker thing, they keep coming out, but not coming out in the anger in an appropriate way, but it comes out with yelling in class or getting in trouble in class. The other thing is you got to remember the remaining parent is overwhelmed. They may or may not be angry. They may or may not have money, a place to live. All of the hierarchy of needs that a student needs to come to school and do well. So you need to develop a rapport with that parent so they will help you. The other thing is the experience of the parent just vanishing from their lives. The biggest thing that the students tell me is it's dehumanizing. They feel like if you have a bunch of puppies and somebody takes the puppy away from you, that's how a student described it to me. Okay, then let's go on to the next slide. You have to let them know they're not alone. They're not fighting this battle alone. They're not the only one. And one of the biggest side effects of my group was the camaraderie. That group of students, you'd see them walking in the halls. And even though they had a secret, excuse me, that's my bronchitis coming out, they didn't feel alone. And they also didn't feel like the evil students with that black cloud because they knew there were others of them like that in the building. I planned self-concept enhancing activities because I thought that's what they needed. I'm sorry. But students would frequently say, no, we need to talk. And they would give me a topic. It could be visiting. It could be writing letters to the incarcerated parent. It could be the whole situation. So once your group gets established and they start trusting you, then they'll help you with where you need to go. But I always plan some kind of a self-concept booster kind of activity. Okay, from that, we'll go to the next one, is I taught them to channel their anger into an area that they had control over. Our mantra, if you want a word for it, was own your zone. What part of your world do you have control over? You have control over school, you have control over whether you do your homework or not, but you don't have control over where you live, and you don't have control over that parent, or even the parent that's still here. And so that was a freeing experience for the kids when they started thinking about it. Wait a minute, I don't have to feel guilty. I taught them ways to try to add to that they had control of, encouraging them to participate in athletics in our school clubs. Okay, we'll go to the next one.
Judy, I've got a question for you. It seems to me that the kind of control in their own zone would have had some benefits in the classroom for those kids. Could you talk about how you've seen that?
Well, when we talked about own your zone, like I said, it became their mantra, and they thought it was cool to say that. They knew then, now, when I'm in the classroom, I have control over my behavior. I have control over whether I do my homework or not. I can't control the other students in the classroom, nor can I control the teacher. So what I tried to do is teach responsibility and ownership for what you can control, because their lives are spiraling out of control. Okay, so the thing that was the hardest for them is their brains would just keep thinking about it. And they kept saying it's like their brains were these little people within them, and they didn't have any idea how to control it. So the first thing I taught them was guided imagery. The guided imagery was a positive, the happy place kind of concept, so that when their brain was taking them in the negative, that they could teach themselves to go to a happy place. Some of the kids had trouble with that, so we talked about physical ways of doing it. And the one that they liked the most was, have them just do squiggles and then fill in the spaces with all of the positive words they could think of. Or another time we did it, fill in the spaces with all of the angry words, colored it over with black, and then we ripped it up in a million little pieces to try to do a physical way of getting those feelings out of your head. The other thing is daily affirmations. I taught them when they walked through the door of the class. We are Lincoln loggers, to say, I am a lovable and capable logger. That sounds a little crazy when you don't know that that's our mantra. Every time they walk through the door of a classroom to say that to themselves. And it was just using the positive affirmation concept to help them realize I can control what's going on. Okay, let's look at the next one. The other thing is, how do you distract yourself when you're at home, when somebody's teasing you, things like that. We talked about music. We made up some songs. One of the goofiest little song was through Row, Row Your Boat. I always get to think what I'm going to, I always get to choose what I'm going to think. Positive thoughts are what I choose. Just stupid little things like that that really gave them something to grab onto. Some of the students were able to journal. I found many of them were not. Part of the reason is their home life was so inconsistent, they couldn't keep track of it. It kept vanishing. We draw pictures, as I told you about the doodles. I encourage a lot of drawing, so I encourage them to draw what they were thinking. I encouraged them to find a trusted adult to talk to, and it was frequently me, especially when they were having to go to court, because sometimes the students actually have to go to court, testify against a parent, and that's pretty tough on a student to do that. And even though we have a CASA system, it doesn't emotionally prepare them. One thing I did teach them is you probably don't want to tell your peers or your friends in the school because it seems to backfire. It gets spread around, they get teased, they get bullied. You know, the your mama jokes become the your whichever parent's sitting in prison, and so then they're immediately mad, and the other students figure out that that's a quick way to get them to explode. And as I tell them, now you're the entertainment, you're not, instead of the teacher being the entertainment. Let's go to the next slide.
I think it's interesting, Judy, and that a lot of people don't know that young people can be asked to testify against their parents. However, there is that piece in law that does not require a spouse to testify against another spouse. And so I think it's something that we don't often think of, that, well, it's a family, so they wouldn't have to testify against a member of the family.
Yes. I mean, it's a horror story. Like, I've had a student talk to me about she knew in the attic under which board the gun was hidden, and the cops were pushing and pressuring her to go tell and show them where it was. And to a sixth grader, you're talking about 11, 12-year-olds, you've got a cop with a gun who's usually big, and you've got your parent, and you're torn in between, and it's a horrible place to put the kids.
Absolutely.
And you talk about PTSD, I don't think anybody's ever labeled it, but I certainly would label it PTSD. Another story I heard was there was a birthday party it was her 10th birthday party, and she had her friends there, you know, the cake and all that kind of stuff, and that was when the cops decided to raid the house in front of all of her friends, birthday cake, the whole thing, and arrest her dad. And, I mean, that's a pretty horrible birthday experience.
Yes, it is.
Maybe still, I mean, she's calmed down a lot, but she still struggles. Because that was, I mean, the timing. I wish that cops would have said, no, we can wait a couple hours, but I guess they can't. Okay, should we go to the next one?
Sure.
Because, getting back to that birthday party, the students feel responsible. Like, if I hadn't had a party here, Dad wouldn't have been here, and Dad wouldn't have got arrested, because he would have been in hiding, like he was a lot. So the students end up feeling somehow responsible. Sometimes the students will know their parent was stealing to buy them something they wanted. some of the older kids that I've dealt with, because I also did this at the high school level, if they could just get a job and help support the family, the parent wouldn't have to be so frustrated and drink so much, which would get them incarcerated. The point of it is the student feels as a part of that family and somehow responsible. It's usually pretty distorted, which is where we come with own your zone, but it's hard on them. And the thing that I've noticed many of them is they don't have the hope. They just assume that's where they'll end up, particularly boys. If the parent is involved in gangs or anything like that, the boys just assume that's the way I'm going to be, and I will be incarcerated at some point in my life.
And unfortunately, there is sometimes a similar thinking amongst teachers and even law enforcement of a familial pattern of incarceration. And so there is some level of stigma attached to being from that family.
Correct. And, you know, it's just, I mean, some kids can tell me, well, my grandfather spent time in prison, my aunt spent time in, my uncle, you know, they can just go down the family line. And so it just, why should I behave in class? Because I'm going to go to prison anyhow, so it doesn't matter. And they tell me that. Mm-hmm. So the concept that I found was probably the most important came out of the Bullies to Buddies program. It's by Izzy Coleman. It's out of New York, from the New York Public Schools Developmental Guidance. And that's kind of, I added own your own zone words because I found those were words that kids could picture in their mind. But the big thing about Izzy was that you don't have to respond with anger. You can choose how you respond. And that's where we get into when an adult is angry and says hurtful things to the student, they can choose not to accept the blame. That's why I taught them ways to help control their brain instead of accepting the blame. When a parent, particularly if there's alcoholism or some gang involvement in the home, the kids feel like if somehow they are part of the problem. And it's pretty distorted when they tell you the whole story, but you have to teach them to be able to evaluate, is this something I have control over or not? What is my zone? And, you know, we've talked about, you didn't put that alcohol in your parents' mouth. You didn't put that gun in your dad's hand. Those kinds of things to help them understand that they really didn't have control and to try to give them some way to control their guilt. And that's probably the reason that they ended up in trouble all the time, is there just huge amounts of guilt. And when we get to a later slide where we talk about one of the students I had help give me some ideas, he talks a little bit more about how I helped him learn to control guilt. So the next slide is choose not to accept the blame. How do you choose not to accept the blame? You know, I remember the first time I said that, a very sweet young thing looked at me and said, "You got to be kidding, that's impossible." So that's where we get into what's my zone, what do I have control over? I don't have control over that other person. And the cool thing is you can bring up examples in what's more traditional life to show them. For example, you don't have control when you walk out there and get on that bus. You can't choose which bus you'll get on. Because sometimes we have kids try to get on a different bus to go with their friends. So I use things that they can identify with to help them realize where they have control and where they don't. The other thing is I teach them who can I talk to who will listen, not blame or be mad. And that's hard to find in some of their lives. I was the only one. And so that's because even teachers will get mad at them. They get mad at the frustration. And unless the student tells the teacher, I don't tell the teacher that they have an incarcerated parent. Now, some of the students will tell the teacher and they find that it helps them. Some of the students are not comfortable enough to do that. And then we talk about how can I distract myself from my own brain who keeps thinking about it when I don't want to think about it. So that's when we talk about some of the things we talked about earlier. I do fidget toys. I do those little silly little games, as we call them, and just different ways to help them gain control. I encourage them to doodle in class because doodling gives their eyes something to focus on and helps the brain stop thinking about it.
I think you make a really good point in here about finding someone who you can talk to and will listen and not blame or be mad. One of the things that we highly recommend for a lot of SAPs is having short-term mentors for kids who will just talk and just relate to the young person. Because a lot of times, especially young people with incarcerated parents, don't have a positive adult outside of their family who is just able to relate to them.
That's so true. And they don't have good, positive relationships with their teachers. For some of the reasons, because they're angry people. Other reasons is because they've built a wall because they don't want to let the teacher in. Because the teacher might hurt them, like everybody else. So that is part of it. The thing we talk about is a safety plan. Because especially because we live in an area where there are some drugs and gang influence, if you need to get out, where do you go when you're 10, 11, 12 years old? And how do you get there? You can't just go get in a car. So one of the first things that I found out is that just like your fire station and hospitals are safe places to drop your baby off, they're safe places for students who have walked out of a bad situation. So I teach them that, and we happen to have a hospital right near us. So I teach them that it's, if you have to get out, okay, don't stay and get hurt, but this is where you want to go. And we talk about the pattern, the route they'll take. The other thing I do, which has only a couple of times backfired, is I do give them my home cell phone number. And I have picked kids up and taken them to police stations to get them help in the middle of the night because these students, they don't have. And when the police come in to arrest somebody, that's their focus. Their focus is not on the children. And they usually don't give the children a way or a chance to get out. And then the second part is I try to teach them that police are not all bad, and that some of them will help you, that you how to ask for help. And we have a cop here in our building, and he will talk to kids and say, this is how you can get some help, and that kind of stuff. Because that safety plan actually just gives them the peace of mind to know that, wait a minute, if this gets too scary, there is a way out. So that's why that's important. And the big thing is you got to let them tell your story, and you may not want to listen to it. It may get scary. You may think, wow, this is worse than a novel or the Hunger Games or something like that. They need to be able to tell their story. They need to get it out. The second part I put on there is I have a drawer full of survival things, toothbrushes. Well, we're middle school kids, so deodorant, things that kids might need if they don't have access to them at home. I have students who live in cars, and part of their living in the car is they don't have these hygiene items. So we make arrangements for them to come early and use our showers, those kinds of things. We're fortunately a uniform school, so we can just provide them with another uniform. That kind of stuff. The other thing, if the family is homeless, then there are resources. We have resources in our community, and I can refer them. The interesting thing is it's hard to get the remaining parent to connect with the resources. They automatically assume they're not going to be able to get help. Nobody likes them. They have that same evil family kind of feeling. So it always takes me several attempts to get the family into some of the resources that they need. Once they do it, they usually come in and tell me, thank you, but it takes several times before they will actually allow me to give the name to our homeless group who will go out and help them get an apartment and all kinds of things like that. So you have to look at the big picture. You can't just work with the child. You've got to work with the whole family that's remaining and not in prison.
I think a lot of what you're saying here, Judy, really relates to a lot of the research that I've seen recently on the adverse childhood experiences, the ACEs research, in terms of kids being successful. We have to meet some of these needs and help them to feel like they have somewhere to go for these resources in order to feel just safe.
Well, and one of the things is they have had such a negative experience with community resources. They're expecting a negative response. So, I mean, that's the one thing. Okay, so finding the common way, and I've talked about it. For some reason, silly reason, I have fidget toys and these little gemmy things that you can buy. I tell them a story that they're the gem of the world and they have a future, and they will keep those things in their pockets for months. In fact, I've had kids come back and pull it out of a pocket and show it to me that they've had it for, one of the high school kids had it for at least 6 years. So these little physical things, and part of it's because, you notice the next one, they move a lot. When someone goes to jail, they can't pay their rent, so they have to just walk out with whatever they can take with them in their arms. They don't have a moving company come and move them. So some of these little fidget toys that I give them are the only keepsakes that they have. The other thing is they may not have anything from the incarcerated parent. For example, one of our students with incarcerated parents really struggled because stepdad, who came in the picture, threw away the necklace that the incarcerated dad had given her when she was a child. And she could not forgive him because that was the only thing she had from her bio dad. And things like that become really important. And that's where teachers come in, because it's really hard for a teacher to see a fidget toy or a gem or a stupid little necklace as more important than doing their work. But to that child at that moment, it is the most important thing in the world. The other thing is I will help them write letters to the parent in the prison system if they are allowed. I've mailed them and things like that, but I always make sure the remaining parent or aunt or uncle or whoever is okay with it. I don't do it behind anybody's back. And if you don't, I have to use my home computer because our school computers are all blocked. But you can go online to Department of Corrections and you can get the addresses of the people so you can help them write the letters. And some of those letters have been like a catharsis for the student because they can tell that parent what they want to tell, wish they could tell them in person. So that's another way that sometimes is help. The last one is the hardest thing I think for me in the beginning was for me to realize what real unconditional positive regard was. Because just by being a human being, we have prejudices. And you have to learn to have your poker face. You cannot make any verbal kind of judgment. And you can't project those to the students because they're checking you out to see if you're going to think they're evil too, just like everybody else does. And I think that was probably one of the hardest things for me, not to raise my eyebrows or go, whoa, when the kid would say my parents in jail or whatever. And you have to be prepared to hear those horror stories without reacting, other than looking for Maslow's basic needs and just keep connecting with own your zone and that sort of thing. And that's probably, as a counselor, was one of the most difficult, because just by being a human, you have opinions, and you can't let those opinions come out. And this is why they don't connect with teachers, because teachers have those opinions. And you know, we learned way back when in one of our psychology class, it was better to be the bad kid if you couldn't be the good kid than to be the nothing kid in the middle. And that's where these students come from. It's like, okay, my family's bad, so I'll just be the bad kid in your class, and it's okay. And I can give you an example. I just had it happen this morning. One of the students came in and said, I got kicked out of social studies. And I said, you did? Because it's not a teacher that normally does that. So we chatted a little bit, and I said, well, let's go back and talk to your teacher and see what's going on. She said, I didn't kick him out. Well, in the hallway, he overheard another student say, get out, to another student, because she had heard that and had gone out and stopped the students. But he just assumed he was the evil one, and he was kicked out of class. And he had not been. Excuse me. So that's the kind of stuff you're going to find your students thinking. And you're constantly going, oh, okay. So if you give them the chance to tell you, they'll tell you. Sometimes more than you want to know. Okay, the next thing is on group leadership, and we've all had group leadership classes. I think the first thing I do is I establish, the normal group rules of what's in the group stays in the group. You don't tell outside, but you can't tell parents, these kinds of things. So just the normal group rules. But the big thing is you have to be prepared to go with the flow. Because once they trust you, once they know their group is safe, they'll take you in all kinds of examples. And probably my best example was at the Christmas time. I was going to do this little thing on themselves and how they could tell their parent how good they were doing in school and all that good stuff. And one of the students said to me, nah, we got to talk, because we're going on visits next week, and this is horrible. And then they each had to tell their horrible story about how they get frisked before they go in, how they have to go through gates and hear the bars sliding behind them, how they aren't allowed to get out of their chair, and the rules for visiting in a prison. So sometimes they're going to tell you what they need to talk about. And some of them, it was interesting because they would give advice to each other. Well, if the big dude comes up and says to you things, this is what you do. And tell each other how to deal with the corrections officers, because they're scary folks to these students.
And a lot of that goes back to what you said earlier about the dehumanizing experience of going on a visit into a prison to visit an incarcerated family member.
And we have a church that takes a van at the holiday time to visit the area ones, and that's kind of where I learned about this. But it was interesting because one of the students says, oh, you pretend you don't have a voice and you look down at your feet and you play with your hands or you sit on your hands. And it was like they were coaching each other on how to do this thing called visit. So, and then when it comes back in January, you know what we have to talk about. Not what the counselor thought we ought to, but talk about how did it go. Did you get, some prisons let them give their parent a hug, some prisons don't, and that usually creates quite a discussion because the ones that don't, the kids are mad because they would like to be able to. Some prisons, they're sitting at a table and they can actually touch them. Some prisons it's through the glass. So, I mean, they have tons of stories to tell, and the stories just keep growing. Okay, now this is where I asked my 8th grade students who had been in the group what their advice would be. And you see the top, violence is not the answer to everything. David, and he said, I can use his name, it was when one of the group. And his comment, and this, it actually almost made me cry, because like, yes, I'm making a difference, was the most helpful part was I taught him to use his mind and not his hands or his fists. I don't remember that analogy, but obviously he connected. And David, this next 2 slides are from David, because David had a quite interesting experience. He was living with an 18-year-old sister. He had both parents in prison, one in Mexico and one here in Illinois. So he had no parent for a period of 2.5 years. So David was a pretty angry, chunky, beginning to be a football player kind of guy. So the fact that he's calmed down and actually doing well in school tells you how much he had to work at it. My relaxation exercises, the deep breathing, the tighten your muscles and relax them, all of the things we kind of learned. That helped them. Sometimes I could get them to do them. Sometimes I couldn't. I didn't see them as helpful, but David said they were. So I guess even if they weren't taking them very seriously, they were actually learning. And then the last one about problems at home or school was helpful. And I think the secret was I didn't make him feel stupid when they asked, but accepted them. A lot of times I would say, good question. Because they would ask questions that I hadn't even thought of that needed answering. So I think that's the one thing that we need to teach them, and probably to all of our students, not just the students in this particular group. Okay, let's go to the personality check. And I put, as I said, own your zone was my mantra. In other words, I taught them that it's okay to be themselves, because even though we are a uniform school, some kids have nicer shoes, they have nicer bows in their hair, they have cooler book bags, you know, that kind of stuff. And this was a problem for our students because a lot of times they have no money coming in. Maybe the parent that's remaining is working, maybe they're not. So money was whatever welfare they could get, whatever we gave them. So I guess one of the things I really stressed was you don't need shoes, you don't need clothes to learn. All you need to learn is something covering you and pens and pencils and markers and all of that that I can give you. And so and the shoes it's crazy, but in this area, teenage shoes are a big deal. Kids will get in fights over shoes. So, like I said, I'm not exactly sure why they were so important, but they are. And just teach them that you don't need that. And when a student comes up and makes a comment about your shoes, you can change the subject to something that you want to talk about. Like, did you get your math done? That was something that I taught them to say. Get your English done. Did you get this? That was a good subject changer so that they didn't have to feel embarrassed. And then the last one, true friends will like you for who you are, not what you are not, or what you have on, that kind of stuff. I said that probably 1,000,000 times. And actually the cool thing is, as David told me, it did come through. You always wonder if they're hearing you. Okay, we'll go to the summary for my counselor points. I think your number one, and that's why I put this first, is you've got to support that family because they are not stable. They don't have stable housing. They don't have stable food. They don't have basic needs. You have, as a counselor, have got to build in the system to do that. And sometimes our school boards don't realize that. Our school boards don't see that as part of our job. Our job is changing schedules. Our job is whatever. But if we're going to help that student with an incarcerated parent, we have to help them in those basic needs, or going right back to dear old Maslow, who taught us without those basic needs, nothing's going to happen. The other thing is the dignity thing. They have no dignity. They have felt as the evil family, and I keep using the word evil family because the students use that word. They feel like they're the evil family. So part of what I tried to do was to help them realize, number one, they weren't evil. Number two, they had dignity. They had respect. And help them realize that maybe society sees you as bad. And that was another thing they taught me, is I would say, no, you're not bad. People don't see you that way. And then they'd slam their fist on the table and say, you know what they say, da-da-da-da. And when I walk in a store, they follow me around because they know who my dad is, which is probably not true, but it's probably the way they're dressed, that they follow them around making sure they're not stealing. So the whole point is you have to help them build personal dignity. And that's a tough, tough thing. And it's going to take more than 6 or 8 weeks of a group, I can tell you that. With students, like, it's taken years.
I think you make an excellent point here, Judy. One of the things that I often say to schools as I'm talking about student assistance and those things is that the one thing we have to remember is not every kid starts the race to the top from the same starting line, nor do they run that race on the same flat track. A lot of kids have obstacles in their way as they try to achieve educationally that are things that other students don't have to deal with. And it's those things like stable housing and money for food and basic needs that I think are those obstacles that keep kids from being successful.
And they do. And one thing, like this morning, the first thing a student came in and said, I couldn't get breakfast this morning. Take them to the cafeteria, get them breakfast. Sit down with them, that's a good time to talk. I teach them that I'm safe to tell things like that I'm not going to laugh at them, that I'm going to try to solve the problem. And our cafeteria is getting used to me walking kids down there to get extra food. Okay, what this last thing is, this is if you want to talk to me, we want to talk any more, this is contact information if you need it. And I know that Dale's going to have the slideshow available for other people to look at or to look at it again, if that would help you. But if you want to call and we'll share stories, because the thing that I've learned is that every single one of these students has a story. And while their story might have some tragic parts, there's some real survival parts in that story that tells you they will make a good person if we can just change the path that they're on. So now we can open the questions.
I appreciate your willingness to present for us today. Do we have any questions for Judy from the participants? Hearing none at the moment. If you have additional questions, you can always contact Judy, like she said, with her contact information here on the screen. And, of course, you can always contact us at the Student Assistance Center via my email, which is dale.gasparovic@prevention.org. Or you can follow us on Twitter at SACenterPF, or you can call me at 217-299-8803. Thank you so much, Judy, for your presentation today, and thank you all for attending. Have a great day.
Thank you. Cool.